Ladies and gentlemen, CNN published an article, Millions Who Likely Voted for Trump Want Him Barred from Future Office. Now, before we get to that article, this is just a couple of articles that I'm going to read. Nearly 2/3 of Republicans say they would likely leave party if Trump starts new one. Washington Examiner, February 4th, 2021. It doesn't sound like millions upon millions or 74 million Americans who voted for President Trump want him barred from future office if 2/3 of Republicans would leave the GOP if Trump starts a new one, a new party. So that article will be, these articles will be below in the comment section, okay? In the pinned comment. Nearly 2/3 of Republicans say they would likely leave party if Trump starts new one. Poll. A majority of Republican voters would likely join a new political party if former President Donald Trump starts one. A survey of Republicans found. Okay, that doesn't sound like he's on the ropes. Then you have Trump wins highest percentage of non-white voters. Highest percentage of any Republican in 60 years, Newsweek, by Matthew M. Pelly. Okay, this is according to exit polls. You look and... Okay, Newsweek again. Trump made gains in every demographic except for white men, it says. Okay. How is that possible if he is a supremacist and a horrendous person whose words compel others to commit heinous acts? Then you have something that always is, just not addressed. Media contempt for Trump shows in 92% negative coverage. This is an Investor's Business Daily article. 92% negative coverage of his presidency. You have somebody who's had only negative coverage. Washington Post, New York Times, MSNBC, CNN. I mean, the most apoplectic, seething, fuming, hysterical, manic, obsessed news coverage has almost been virtually completely negative leveled against President Trump. You've had almost 100%, 92% negative media coverage. Yet he still did better among non-white voters than any Republican in 60 years, according to Newsweek. And just recently, 2/3 of Republicans would actually leave the GOP if Trump starts a new political party. And to top that off, Trump approval remains stable in new NBC poll. So this is an NBC News article. 87% of Republicans approve of how Trump is doing. Okay, that is a January 17th, 2021. That's after the tragedy that took place in D.C. And so, where is the evidence for this grandiose claim? Hit subscribe to this channel right now. We're back on our way to 200,000 subscribers. I'm going to put the links below from the Investor's Business Daily, NBC News, Washington Examiner, and CNN in the pinned comment. Hit subscribe. Tell your friends about this channel because I'm going to give you all the evidence you need from reputable sources to completely debunk the nonsense you hear from publications that have devoted their existence to just undermining and taking down Trump. The hilarious thing is that it never works. President Trump, there were missteps, so there were self-inflicted wounds. President Trump, the best thing that ever happened to President Trump was that Twitter banned him, which will eventually tank that company. And I've talked about the self-inflicted wounds. Okay, I've talked about the missteps. But let's just read this. Millions who likely voted for Trump want him barred from future office. It's common that many politicians grow more popular once they leave office. That has not been the case for former President Donald Trump. On the eve of his impeachment, and so nobody cares about impeachment within the Republican Party. They don't want him impeached because there haven't been charges leveled at him in a court of law. Why? Because no judge would convict President Trump. He used the word peaceful. He did not tell people to engage in the horrendous activity that took place. He didn't instruct anyone to do anything. And if anything, one of the charges is that, you had protesters a day before committing some really horrific deeds that had nothing to do with Trump. So, and that's a whole other story. Okay, Trump is protected under the First Amendment. Political speech is protected. There's not a court in this country. The mayor of D.C., the attorney general of D.C. hasn't gone after President Trump. Why? Why haven't they indicted Trump or leveled charges against him? Because they can't. Because impeachment is purely a political tool. And they know 92% negative media coverage. They impeached Trump on an ellipsis. They purchased a dossier and called that evidence. Could you imagine if Trump purchased a dossier for all the claims that he's made the past couple of months? Could you imagine what Democrats would do? But here, it's common that many politicians grow more popular once they leave office. That has not been the case for former President Donald Trump. That's not true. He might not have grown more popular, but his approval rating has stayed constant, has remained constant. And if anything, Republicans would actually leave the GOP if he started a new political party. But here, on the eve of his impeachment trial in front of the Senate, okay, the impeachment trial is not a trial like in a court of law. It's a political stunt. They're impeaching him because they are trying to say he is directly responsible for the actions that have taken place. We had 5 to 6 months of endless chaos and mayhem and vandalism and criminal activity linked, I should say, corresponding with left-leaning protests. We have endless video of left-leaning organizations battling and confronting law enforcement in Portland, in Seattle, and other cities. We have CNN, the same publication that says, Trump, his voters want him barred from future office, with a journalist in front of a building set ablaze saying, well, the protests were fiery yet mostly peaceful. The building was being burnt down behind him. And still the headline was, it was mostly peaceful. I mean, if you couldn't find a more Orwellian dystopian headline. And just the optics alone tell you everything you need to know. When there's horrendous criminal activity, I mean, and then the question is, how many minority-owned businesses were also burnt to the ground? How much wealth was taken away from all people, but especially people of color, under the premise of we're going to protest, and just coincidentally, you have all of this chaos and mayhem and vandalism and buildings being torched. You have police buildings being set ablaze. But there are questions like, how much wealth did people of color lose from all of this? Businesses that were burnt to the ground. We know there was David Dorn. We know that this 70-plus-year-old black man, courageous, noble former police captain, lost his life when he was defending the business of one of his friends. It wasn't even his own business. And yet nobody speaks, nobody on the left, I should say, speaks about this man. Why? Because it doesn't fit their narrative. But let's just continue reading. So, and the end of his life was on, I believe, on Facebook. So, videoed on Facebook, which was horrendous. But these are 19 people lost their lives, and there's zero correlation between rhetoric, between the actions of left-leaning politicians or organizations, and the violence that was associated or that coincided with left-leaning protests. That's a whole other story. You have Democratic Party politicians saying, yeah, people need to get in the faces of other people. Like, that's an actual instruction. But here, on the eve of his impeachment trial in the front of the Senate, new polling reveals that more Americans want him convicted than at any point during his first impeachment. Yeah, you've also had nonstop negative news coverage that blames him directly. You don't blame the Lincoln Project people directly. And you see what's going on there with the scandals they face. That's a Never Trump organization dissolving before our very eyes. 22 people accused one of their founders of horrendous criminal activity. But you don't say all the lives lost from from Iraq and Afghanistan and all the counterinsurgency conflicts are directly, the Lincoln Project is directly responsible because they advocated, they pushed for, they wrote speeches on behalf of Bush, Cheney, and Rumsfeld's failed military and never-ending quagmires, military interventions. They never make the correlation between Libya and President Obama. Is President Obama directly responsible? Is he legally responsible? Of course he's morally responsible, we know that. But is he legally responsible for the lives lost in Libya and the chaos and mayhem and the unrest and the civil war in that country after his failed NATO intervention? So they don't utilize the standards by which they judge Trump upon themselves because they're hypocrites. Great many people in the Democratic Party are the definition of hypocrites. They just want to level, they stand upon this lofty soapbox of virtue, and they want to level condemnation and scorn and judgment upon others, especially Trump. But they don't utilize the same vantage point when they're caught with their words or they're caught doing horrendous things. Tara Reade accused Biden. According to the value system of the left, he should never have been even a nominee. He was. You should believe the accusation. Doesn't matter if direct evidence isn't there. But see, they don't work that way. Democrats don't work that way. They use the suffering and and plight of others, 92% negative media coverage against Trump to create this world where they might not be perfect, but they're going to level. But they should be forgiven if they write something racist or bigoted or horrendous. If they say sorry, Republicans should never be forgiven. They should be canceled and erased from history. They should be believed when they deny an allegation. Republicans or Trump should never be believed. When violence and $1 billion to $2 billion in property damage is linked or correlated, coincides with left-leaning protests for months on end, you have endless video of left-leaning organizations standing off and confronting and fighting law enforcement. That's just, a moral reckoning. But it's Trump who should be impeached because his words, his arguments led to that, even though he had zero prior knowledge and he had nothing directly to do with what happened. It was a terrible tragedy. But again, the 19 lives lost and the past couple of months prior to the election was also a tremendous tragedy as well. The fiery but mostly peaceful meme was an unfortunate reality. It was actually what CNN reported on. But here, more amazingly, more want Trump barred from holding national office ever again, and even an unfavorable rating of any president after one term. A new ABC News Ipsos poll released Sunday shows that 56% of Americans are in favor of the Senate convicting Trump and barring him from holding federal office. That's not Republicans. That's 56% of very likely a poll that actually asks more Democrats than Republicans. Just 43 are opposed to such an action. 56% of Americans in any poll pertaining to President Trump will probably side with CNN or MSNBC. You have 92% negative media coverage. That's the context, the nuance here that people are missing. President Trump is very popular within the Republican Party. He runs the Republican Party because there are two standards of morality, of justice, there's two ways of looking at the world. One is the CNN, MSNBC way. Well, Biden was accused, but you know what? Gosh, there's no direct evidence. But Trump was accused. Oh my God, he's horrible. Then it's, well, more people accuse Trump. So they dilute their value system with, well, more. If you have more accusations, therefore the accusations are more believable. That's their mentality, the left. And so you have this world where everything's morally relative, but at the end of the day, they come out on top. Why? Well, you just have so many people repeating the same thing, and it must be true. Trump never worked with Russia. The Steele Dossier was purchased by Clinton. Alexander Downer gave the FBI only gossip. The intelligence community was not 17 intelligence agencies, it was only 3. The assessment that Russia hacked the DNC and that Russia helped Trump was only that, a unanimous assessment confirmed. See, these are semantic games. Nobody has stated with certainty that any of that happened, and nobody has stated with certainty, or nobody's given, nobody has ever stated with certainty, not CrowdStrike, not within the indictments of the 18 Russian intelligence officials based on that third-party tech firm, which was outsourced by Democrats. Okay, it was based on Company One's evidence, wasn't based on any evidence derived from the United States government. And when Company One and everybody else in Congress testified, they said they don't have direct evidence of anything. But nobody has ever said with certainty that Russian Facebook ads swung any votes, yet they still run with it. The people who've made the most baseless allegations and claims have been media and Democrats. Trump is like the most truthful and honest person compared to today's media and Democratic Party. But here, 56% of Americans are not necessarily Republican voters. The millions who likely, so I guess they got away with millions who likely voted for Trump want him barred from future office. So that's how they get away. Well, it's millions who likely voted because there's probably millions in there. That's not true at all. Trump runs again in 2024. He would annihilate and obliterate anyone on that field. Ben Sasse was censured, as was Liz Cheney in Nebraska and Wyoming. Okay. They're impeaching Trump again on something they can't convict him of in a court of law. They don't have direct evidence that he compelled people or incited anything. They don't have direct evidence that he strong-armed and leveraged Zelensky. They don't have direct evidence he worked with Trump, with Russia or Putin. They don't have direct evidence that his taxes show anything criminal. They don't have direct evidence of any of the allegations against him. That's why the Supreme Court threw out the emoluments case. That's why he hasn't been convicted or indicted while he was president, and he won't be when he's done the next 4 years. 2022 takes place. You finally will have a Republican GOP. A Trump Republican GOP. So they're just creating a fantasy that they believe, that they want to believe. But here, this is merely the latest poll. Every single poll last month I could find that meets CNN standards for reporting has shown at least 56% of Americans want him to be barred from holding or seeking federal office again. 56% of Americans who want him to be barred. Every poll that meets CNN standards is not what Republicans care about, but definitely not what Trump voters care about. So you have 74 million Americans voting for President Trump. He would have done infinitely better had he not been on Twitter. Thank God Twitter banned President Trump. He should never have insulted LeBron James. He should never have insulted NFL athletes. He'd misused Twitter towards the end of his presidency especially. And so he presided over paradigm-changing foreign policy accomplishments, so much so the Abraham Accords and peace and the beginning of peace between North and South Korea, that you have Moon Jae-in in South Korea and Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel wanting Biden's administration to continue Trump's legacy. There are articles saying they're hoping that Trump's foreign policy continues in the Biden administration because he actually left the world, this is a fact, in a better position, a better place. President Obama turned Libya into a failed state with a NATO intervention that he admits was his worst mistake. There are now human beings being bought and sold in Libya right now because of the NATO intervention. That's what regime changes do. That the left and that Democrats and Republicans have pushed for. And so you have all of this vitriol and venom and contempt for Trump, but it's not because of any, failed intervention, any military catastrophe. No, those happened with Bush and President Obama. Those are quickly forgiven because they play the political game that the establishment, that media is fine with. Bush was the worst president we've ever had by far. Yet now he's on Jimmy Kimmel, and here's my artwork. I mean, if you want to link the suffering and the sorrow and the chaos and the mayhem and the lives lost and lives ruined to decisions, there's no comparison. Bush, President Obama, and Trump. Trump did not preside over the decisions that those presidents made. But anyway, give me your thoughts below. I'll give you 56% of Americans in a CNN poll is not, absolutely not, does not correlate to the 2/3 of Republicans who would leave the GOP. In the Washington Examiner article is below in the description, who would leave the GOP to follow President Trump. Give me your thoughts. Thank you so very, very much. Hit subscribe right